Good to go.
Okay, so hello, sneak peekers. Today's sneak peek, we'll be talking with Dr. Andrew Carlson about the history behind play to screen adaptations alongside successful and not so successful ventures. Carlson's research encompasses Shakespearean performance and African American history. Hello, Professor Carson.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks.
So, Professor Carson, what is the history behind adapting plays into movies?
Well, the history of adapting plays into movies. Uh, I think since the movies have been around, people have been very interested in good stories being told, and particularly much earlier when the theater was much more popular. Films like Streetcar Named Desire, or some of the great plays. Lended themselves to film because people were aware of their Broadway success, and so they were very financially successful as well, and became very popular in that way. We also had some crossover, some theater directors. Elie Kazan, who directed, On the Waterfront and many others, was one of the Tennessee Williams' primary directors on the stage as well. So there was a lot of crossover there, and I think films, because actors make careers in both the theater and in film, it seemed to lend itself in many different ways.
And has that been traditional with actors? In the past, going way back to even before Shakespeare, actors kind of dipping their toe across different areas where their skills were applicable before we got to like modern day inventions like movie theaters.
Yeah, I mean, I think artists have always found a variety of ways to support themselves, and even before films, I think often artists did a number of things within the theater to make a living. So I don't think it's just films that are creating this kind of crossover, and this kind of ways of making a living that would that's multifaceted. So
And so,
yeah.
with taking a play, with the play, you have everything like stage, costumes, a lot more goes into, well, I wouldn't say a lot more, but a lot does go into the production of a play.
Yeah.
And then going into a film, you do keep some of the similar elements like costuming and setup, set production, designing. But, like, what are some things that could, like, kind of are lost that, can change a play away from its original source versus the film?
Well, on film, I think there is one key thing that is not there that is there in the theater.
And
A
what is that?
huge thing. Audience.
Oh,
And I think
okay.
audience, you think that the people create the stage production that and it is going to be the same every time, but in the live event the audience changes oftentimes what's going on the stage, or at least influence it significantly.
How so?
Um, well, different kinds of moments when they're laughing, different moments when they're not listening, interruptions, the fact that the actors know that anything could happen. Whereas with film, yes, it has an audience, but that audience doesn't influence the nature of the event happening on stage.
Okay.
And so it is somewhat different to create just in film right now. So if I was, if I had a live studio audience here, it would influence some of the things that I'm saying. But right now I don't, and so so I think there is just a real difference that a live audience makes in theater that is not there in film.
Okay. And so, with the lack of audience, how different is a movie going experience versus a theater play experience? I remember when I went to a play, Cabaret, and that's kind of one of the first plays I'd been to in a while, and it was just this different like feel and atmosphere. Like I was placed there, and so is that like a key element too? Like, what is a moviegoer missing out on? Just sitting in a seat in a in a cinema.
Well, I just think that they're different artistic mediums. I think movies can do certain things that you can't do in a theater. The level of realism, the level of dialogue where you don't have to project your voice, where you don't have to make everything as clear in your body. Film is really good at that really tight realism and naturalism. They can recreate everything. So I think that's a they really film really lends itself to capturing a lot of that. And then I think the theater, I mean, what isn't there in film is that collective experience that is in conversation with the performers. I think you can have kind of a collective experience at a movie, but it's still kind of my experience, at least, is that you're kind of still isolated from it, except in some kind of extreme examples, maybe a Star Wars or something, but where that collective experience is part of the event. But I think in the theater, it's the event. It's what the meaning making exchange between the performers and the audiences that really creates it and makes it happen. So.
And so, looking back, there's been a lot of films, especially in recent years, that you see that their source material was from a written work. I guess, is there certain elements that would make a venture successful, or is it just, luck of draw? Like, when you're looking at taking a previous work and turning it into screen, what are some things to look at, especially with the play?
Well, I mean, I think many films and a lot of plays, I mean, it's about good dialogue, interesting characters, and a plot you want to, be engaged in. So I think many of the things that are successful in plays also translate very easily to the movies. David Mamet, who is a screenwriter, but also a playwright, sort of says that those basic principles of plot, of really hooking an audience's attention and having them want to find out what's going to happen next are some of the real essential parts of the essential parts of a movie and of a play. And so I think there's a lot that they share in terms of those basic things. And I think films can do things again that theater can't, realistic explosions, some of the action, some of the spectacle, and certainly theater has all kinds of spectacle, but that some of that spectacle, film can just take to a different level. But at the same time, I think the principles of good storytelling hold true. And so the question generally isn't which one is, what are the things you have to maintain, but is it a good story in the first place? Yeah. Is it compelling in the first place? So something like August Osage County is going to be compelling no matter where you are, and so that's the reason it makes a decent film.
Okay. And so, kind of one of the films that we had our focus on that it was being adapted into a movie was Fences. So, like, could you give us like a little analysis of your own of like, taking such a titular play and now bringing it back to screen? And they have some pretty good actors that I'm excited to look at attached to it, like Viola Davis and Denzel Washington, and not to mention, August Wilson did help adapt it as well before he passed.
Well, I think August Wilson is one of the most significant American playwrights in the history of our dramatic literature, and his century cycle, where he wrote a play for each decade of the African American experience, is part of the core. Artistic contribution of dramatic literature to this country. So I think anytime you're doing August Wilson's work is important and is a good thing. Denzel Washington played Troy Maxon, the central character, on Broadway, and I think and before that James Earl Jones played it, and others have taken the role. I think this is more kind of from an acting point of view, but I think what film does is it allows you to not have to externalize your process as much. And what I mean by that is, if you're having a thought as a film actor, you just kind of have to have the thought. and the camera catches it. As a stage actor, there's part of it that needs to kind of be externalized. You can honestly have the thought, but you kind of have to make it visible and palpable and felt, because there's an audience there, and they're not they 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 have lots of different options of where to focus. It's not just the camera focusing right on there. So I think there is some of that where it's both bigger physically in the theater often, and vocally certainly, because you need to communicate in a different kind of way. And specifically with this, I noticed just in the trailer that the scene that the trailer focuses on, where Troy is talking to Corey, and probably the most famous scene in the play about not worrying about if people like you, but if they're doing right by you. You can watch online the Broadway version of that scene, and it's very different. It's very different because of the things that I just mentioned, which is that there is a live audience there. The live audience is laughing during a good part of that scene. It creates a totally different understanding of what Troy is doing in those moments, because the audience is affecting our experience. Whereas in the trailer, there may be, Denzel has a moment in the trailer where he's laughing to himself, but it can be much more subdued, much more subtle, and doesn't have that influence of what the audience is thinking to affect our experience as much. We have that experience. And so you can already see how there are a couple of changes potentially in just the audience's response. And in interpretation, because it looks like it's a different interpretation in the film than it was on Broadway.
And so, is there anything that you're looking forward to with such a film that had such an impact on like portraying the lives of African Americans, and in a way, it's showing something in the past and bringing it to a modern time and like placing it. And some people would argue, with some current, with the current climate of some things right now, that it's timely. And so, what would be your feedback on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I hope that the film makes more people know who August Wilson is. I hope that the film makes more people read his plays. I hope that the film makes more people talk about the content of the struggle that was going on for African Americans in the 1950s, and the white racism that was influencing this family. I hope that more people do plays by African American authors. I hope that more theaters open up spaces and funding for Black playwrights. I hope that that all of these things can be part of the conversation that would be spurred from the sort of national attention that a play like Fences gives, because there's still a lot of institutional discrimination in the American theater that needs to requires attention. And so not just the content of the film, but if it can bring a larger conversation about African American writers who exist even beyond August Wilson, I think that would be a worthwhile. It would just be important in creating more justice in the American theater.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sneak Peekers, for tuning in, and I hope you all had a great time with our discussion. Again, this is Dr. Andrew Carlson at the University of Texas, and I am Danielle Ransom. Thank you. That was really great.
Oh, great.